almost about that time. Right about now.
Right about now. Funk, bunk, 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 soul brother.
Jonah Berger, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So great to have you. I really enjoy your books. You are, I think I heard you saying on another podcast that you were a language detective, and I love that. I love the idea.
Spent the last few years being a language detective. Yes.
Yes, you were the Sherlock Holmes of language. So this is exciting. So, language is such an interesting topic and something that, again, we use so many words, we write with so many words, and yet I don't think we are very conscious of the words that we use and how certain words can make an impact. I certainly am aware of it as a headline writer and as a writer for Entrepreneur Magazine. I'm constantly thinking about how do I get people to read this story, or what is the exact word that I can use here that will influence people to want to do what I'm asking them to do. So, and I think many of my users are in the same, or many of my listeners are in the same position. So, before we get into magic words and the power of words, I'd love to get a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do now, and what sparked your interest in language.
Yeah. So I'm a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been there now for, I think, right over 15 years, because they just sent me a wonderful email saying, hey, you've been here for 15 years. Would you like a lawn chair or a cheap watch? And I went with the lawn chair because I thought that was a better choice.
Nice.
So I've been there for over 15 years. I did my PhD in marketing at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I study word of mouth, social influence, why things catch on. I'm interested in those types of questions. I got interested in language actually in quite an interesting way. I wouldn't say I was interested in language per se. I was interested in measurement. And so a number of years ago, I and a colleague did this paper on what makes online content viral. So we looked at 6 months of New York Times articles, everything that was written by the Times over that period. Some of the articles made the most emailed list, some didn't. And we wondered why. And this was a paper that we wrote over 10 years ago, even started the project probably around 15 years ago. So we had all this data, which articles made the list, which didn't. And we were trying to figure out why. And we had some ideas, right? We were maybe positive articles or negative articles are more successful. Maybe more surprising or more interesting articles are more successful. But the challenge was thousands of articles are a lot of articles. And it's really hard to measure things like how positive or negative is the article, or how surprising or interesting is the content. And so we were doing things like have research assistants reading a 2-sentence summary of the article and rating them in their own perception of how surprising or interesting it was. But this would take a long time to do for a lot of articles. It felt a little subjective to us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't completely subjective, but it was a little subjective. And it just wasn't very scalable, right? However long it took someone to do 10 articles, it took them 10 times as long to do 100, and took them 10 times as long to do 1,000. And so it was just hard to do. And so we were sitting there going, well, is there a better way to measure some of this stuff? And we came across this tool called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, or as scientists call it, LIWC, L-I-W-C. And it's by this great researcher, Jamie Pennebaker out of UT Austin. And it basically takes any content you want, can be a news article, can be a social media post, whatever it is, and scores it on a bunch of dimensions based on the presence of different words. And we thought, this is pretty cool, right? Like, we can run these 7,000 articles all through this thing in a matter of seconds.
Is it AI generated?
What'd you say?
Is it AI?
No. So I'll get there.
You get
just
there.
A dictionary. Just a dictionary. It's literally just flags. There's 100 words in this category. Every time one of these words shows up, it adds a 1 to a counter.
Got it.
So there's not AI, very simple dictionary approach. But in the late 2000s, like 2008 and 9, as we were doing this, I wouldn't say this was innovative. LIWC had been around for a while, but it was certainly not what everybody was doing. And so we started going like, hey, we can get features of content in a neat and new way. And since then, I've used a variety of tools in a variety of different projects. I've used things like topic modeling, which allow us to figure out the main topics or themes in a piece of content. I've used more sophisticated machine learning approaches like word embeddings. Obviously, today, all of us are familiar with ChatGPT and all the things going on there.
Right.
What I will say is that this isn't a case where the highest tech thing is always the best thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the basic approaches are still quite good. But I think what's so neat is that we don't just have to be subjective. We can take these objective measurement tools, just like the microscope revolutionized chemistry or the telescope revolutionized astronomy. These natural language processing tools have revolutionized the study of human behavior. And so we can study language in a lot more interesting ways than we ever could before.
That's really exciting to me. And I'm so excited to get into your, what you've learned, and that's really what Magic Words is all about. The interesting thing, I want to start with just the phrase magic words, because I was thinking in naming your book, because you're such a language expert, I'm sure thinking of the word magic words, specifically that phrase, was something that it didn't just come random. You weren't like, that's a really catchy phrase. Like, you must put some research in. So tell me a little bit just about how you came up with the term magic words.
I'm very good at second guessing myself. So I'm going to second guess myself even now. I'm sure that there might be something better out there than magic words. But what I liked about magic words is we're all familiar with this idea that words have power. Right. So we're all familiar with this notion. Even our now 5-year-old, I start the book with the story of him when he was younger, and the word peas. And so he had a number of different words: yo for yogurt, brow bear for brown bear. But he discovered the word peas. What he really meant was please, but he didn't have his L's yet, so it sounded like peas. And what he would do is he would say yo for yogurt. And if you went to get him yogurt, he'd go get you yogurt. He'd stop talking. But if you didn't get up right away and go get him yogurt, he'd say yo, and then he'd add peas to the end. Yeah. And what I found fascinating, he had lots of other words, and he gained many more words. And now he's older, so he recently said, "Dad, you're not being specific enough." And I was like, "What word specific?" Right. So he obviously has many more words. But what I found so neat is he realized the word please had power. Right. If you didn't do what he wanted, he felt like he could add this word to the end and make it more likely that you would do something. And we're all familiar with truly magic words, abracadabra, or, Shazam, or whatever it might be. And we think that stuff doesn't exist, but words have a lot of power. Using the right word in a request can make people 50% more likely to say yes. Saying you recommend something rather than like something can make people, a third more likely to take your recommendation. And so, yes, they're truly magic words, but they're also regular words that have immense power. And so if we understand how to use them, we can harness their magic.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's get into some specifics here. One of the things that was really illuminating to me is you talked about turning actions into identities, and you tell the story of asking people to vote, right? Explain what we mean by turning actions into identities and why that's an effective way to use language.
Yeah, so I'll start here with a little bit of a story, because I think it'll help frame the idea. And so a number of decades ago, researchers at Stanford are interested in language and the language of basically saying yes. So they go to a local preschool, they ask 4 and 5-year-olds to help clean up a classroom. It's messy, there are blocks on the floor, crayons. Some of the kids, they're told, "Hey, can you help clean up?" So help, the word help. Other students, they ask them, "Hey, can you be a helper and clean up?" Now, the word help and helper are very similar. One is just adding 2 letters, ER, at the end of help, yet it leads to a 30% increase in people's likelihood of saying yes. It's not just kids in schools, right? As you mentioned, subsequent work looked at voting. And they ask people, "Hey, adults, some people, hey, will you go vote?" And other people, they say, "Hey, will you be a voter?" There, switching from vote to voter leads people about 15% more likely to turn out to vote, just by adding 1 letter, R, to the end of vote. Why does that work? Well, as you sort of mentioned already, this is one of the pieces of a larger category of language called the language of identity and agency. And in particular, it's a strategy called turning actions into identities. And what do I mean by that? Well, all of us are busy. We all recognize that we should vote and help and do a variety of different things. We don't always have time. What we care more about than taking specific actions is holding desired identities, right? We all want to see ourselves as smart and competent and knowledgeable and all those different things. And so the more an action becomes an opportunity to claim a desired identity, well, now we're more likely to do it, right? Helping, yeah, sure, I know that I should help. But if helping is an opportunity to show myself and others that I'm a helper, well, now I'm really going to do it, right? Same with voting, right? Voting, yeah, that's fine. But if voting is an opportunity to show people and myself that I am a voter, I'm more likely to do it. And so by turning actions into identities, we can make people more likely to take those actions because they want to claim those desired identities, right? Think about if I told you about 2 people. I have 2 friends, one runs and one is a runner.
Mhm.
If you had to guess, which one of those two people do you think runs more often?
The runner.
The runner, right? It
Right.
seems like a stable part of who they are. And so we can even use this on ourselves, right? If we want to call ourselves a runner, well, I better run once in a while, right? If I care about that identity, I care about running, I want to be a runner. Well, now I have to go out and run. And so by turning actions to identities, we can not only encourage other people to do things, but shape our own behavior, right? We often describe ourselves as hardworking or innovative or creative. Saying I'm a creator seems like a much more stable thing. I'm an innovator. I'm a hard worker. Those seem like more stable traits, which suggests you're more likely to do them. Interestingly, the same thing holds, but in the opposite direction on the negative side.
Mm.
Losing is bad. Being a loser, well, that would be even worse. Cheating on a test, sure, cheating on a test is bad, but if cheating on a test makes you a cheater, well, that's even worse. And so research finds that when cheating would make you a cheater, students are less likely to cheat on a test because they don't want to claim that undesirable identity. It's kind of like that old litter bug. There's an old slogan, rather than just saying don't litter, say don't be a litter bug. Hold on. Now littering is not just a bad thing, but it would make me a litter bug. I don't want to hold this undesirable identity. Now I'm less likely to litter. And so by shifting the language that we use to talk about things, by shifting the language of identity and agency, we can encourage people to behave in desired ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think of the example of when, we call people influencers or content creators, right? Talk to me about that, because I feel like that is very almost by design. I mean, content creators, I feel like that was a term that was like created maybe by YouTube or like by one of the social media platforms.
They call their community creators,
The
right?
creators.
Which seems, it's not just like a thing you do in your bedroom once a week. It's like who you are. You are
Right.
a creator.
I don't make YouTube videos. I'm a
Yeah.
creator.
Oh, that's a nice hobby. Someone said I make YouTube videos. That's a nice hobby. I'm a creator. Now it sounds like a statement that you do this. This is who you are, right? Same thing with being an influencer, right? I mean, influence has been around forever, but being an influencer now seems like a job. It's a thing. It's an identity. It's who you are. It's not just an activity. It's not just something you do once in a while. It's a stable part of who you are. And so by shifting from these actions to identities, we can make things seem bigger and more stable.
I was thinking about this morning specifically because I'm on my Substack. I just was doing a poll, and I was trying to think, okay, using the Jonah Berger method of of persuasion, how do I, I don't, become a poll taker. You take this, there was sort of like I was kind of struggling with a way to encourage people to take a survey, because this might not be something they want to do, right? Like even though it was like the world
or desirable identity, right? Being a poll taker might not be a desirable identity.
It's not so tell me, like if you were sort of consulting on that, I'm sure you've gotten this type of question before, like how might you approach it? I can tell you what I ended up doing, but I don't know if it's going to work.
I mean, that's a case where being a helper, it's probably not the best thing we could come up with.
Right. Exactly.
But in the 2 seconds I had to think about an answer, it's not bad. Right.
Yeah.
If you said, hey, want to help me out by taking a survey?
That's what I said.
Want to be a helper?
Yeah.
And take this survey? Can you be a helper and take this survey? Can you be a member of the community? Right. I mean, you think about the Taylor Swift's fans call themselves, I think, Swifties.
Swifties.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And so now it's not just, right. It's not just a thing you do once in a while. It's who you are. And so, really people that feel strongly about this are going to want to be labeled as a member of the community, even calling the community something, right? Dan Pink shoots these great videos. He was nice enough to have me on recently, and he calls them pink casts, right? They're not just videos. They're like, it's a pink cast. It's a thing. Right?
Yeah.
And it's a thing that relates to him. And so I think we can use language to communicate things and suggest how big a deal they are, and shape whether or not people take action.
Yeah. And also I feel like you said, in the negative way, and I feel like we see this a lot in politics, is you can identify your opposition. You can give your opposition maybe an identity that they don't want, right? But it's better than saying, these are a bunch, like calling them snowflakes. I'm just thinking of what the right might call the left and what the left might call the right, et cetera. But like something like, instead of saying like they're just wimpy and woke, you say they're snowflakes, right? Like there's something more powerful about that, or effective.
Even the difference between you are wimpy, right? Versus you are a wimp.
Yeah.
Right. Wimpy is sort of an adjective, whereas wimp is a thing, right? It's worse to be a wimp than it is to be wimpy. right?
Yeah.
Wimpy is something maybe you're like once in a while. Wimp is who you are. It's stable. It's going to persist. And so I think it's a subtle shift, but a really interesting one and a really simple one to think about.
I want to talk, you talk in the book about the difference between should and could, and it's a really interesting and subtle difference. And I find myself often using those words. But it talked to me a little bit about what you found in your research between the difference between should and could and how to reframe things using maybe could instead of should, to be more of effective in getting what you want.
Yeah. And I realized, just stepping back for a second, I should mention the framework, because we're diving into one bucket, which is great, but I just want to,
Yeah,
so
of
there
course,
are
please.
6 buckets or types of language in the book, 6 types of magic words, if you will. I put them in a framework called the SPEAK framework. The S is for the language of similarity.
Mhm.
The P is for the language of posing questions. The E is for the language of emotion. The A is for the language of agency and identity. There should be a K, but there's actually 2 C's instead. One is the language of confidence,
Mhm.
and one is the language of concreteness. I wasn't clever enough to come up with an acronym that ends in K, though somebody pointed out that K is the most difficult letter in Scrabble. So I feel a little bit better there.
No, that's a hard one.
But each of those are types of language that exist that we can leverage. And so we've been talking about the language of agency and identity. Language not only communicates information, it suggests what it means to engage in a particular action, who's to fault, who's to blame, who has agency or not. And so all of those can shape language's impact. And so another strategy, we just talked about turning actions into identities, which is one of the, I think, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 in that chapter. Another is the difference between shoulds and coulds. And this is really fascinating research. And what it talks about is, often when we're stuck trying to solve a tough problem, we don't know what to do, often we use the language of shoulds. And what do I mean by that? Well, we go, what should I do? Right? If I'm, I'm sitting at the office and I'm trying to figure out which of 2 courses of action to take, I can only take one. Which one should I take? Which one is the right course of action? And while shoulds is what we often do, it turns out there's a better approach. And so in some studies, some researchers from Harvard had people solve a variety of different problems. For some of them, they asked them that traditional approach, think about what you should do, whether you're trying to be creative or solve this problem, what you should do. For other people, though, they took a subtly but importantly different approach. Rather than asking what they should do, they said, hey, think about what you could do. Now, again, the difference between should and could is quite small. It's just one word. Yet shifting from shoulds to coulds led people to be more creative and come up with better solutions. Because while shoulds focus us sort of down one path, there's one right answer, there's the path to get there, that can lead us to sort of be blind to other options, alternatives, potential directions. What coulds nicely do is they take the blinders off. They encourage us to think really broadly. What's possible? Now, maybe not everything that's possible is a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't pursue all of those directions, but at least by considering at least what's possible, what's out there, what might be worth doing, by considering what we could do, we end up thinking more broadly and we end up coming up with better solutions. And so the next time we're stuck, we're trying to solve a tough problem, be creative, come up with a solution, think about what we could do will help us get to a better outcome.
Yeah. The other difference you talk about, the difference between can't and don't. Right.
Yes.
And that's probably in the same chapter. I hope, and I apologize if I'm jumping around. I just got excited.
No, this is great. No, this is perfect. Yeah. And so I'll talk about can't and don't, and then maybe I'll give you one more or example where you can talk about it. But so this is a situation that's more about ourselves than others. So I've talked about some examples of how we can, motivate others, how we can change their behavior, how we can encourage them to be more creative by thinking about what they could do rather than what they should do. But sometimes ourselves, we're stuck with temptation, right? We're trying to lose weight. We're trying to exercise more. We're trying to spend less time on social media, more time with our families, connect with loved ones, whatever it might be. We have these goals, but they're tough to stick to, right? There's often temptation. We're trying to lose weight, but there's delicious pizza available. We're trying to stay in more often and get some work done, but our friend calls and asks us if we want to go out. And so often in those situations, we say something like, I can't do it. I can't eat chocolate cake. I can't go out. I can't do this thing. And that's a standard way of talking. But it turns out there's a better way of doing it. Some researchers ran a variety of different studies where they asked people in a number of situations to either think about why they can't do something or why they don't do that thing. So if somebody asks you if you want to eat chocolate cake, rather than saying I can't eat chocolate cake, saying I don't eat chocolate cake. And what they found is that switching from can'ts to don'ts, again, not a big switch, just a particular word here. By shifting from can'ts to don'ts, people were more likely to hit their goals, more likely to be successful at the end of this period, more likely to hit the outcome that they were hoping to achieve. And the reason why, again, has to do with this language of agency and identity. So if you think about it, when I say I can't do something, right? I can't have chocolate cake. What does it suggest? It suggests there's something external that's preventing me from doing something. Man, I want to eat that chocolate cake, but I can't because I'm on a diet, or, I said that I wouldn't, or whatever it is. It's not that I don't want to do it. I do want to do it, but something is preventing me. Something external is preventing me. When I say I don't do it, what suggests the locus of control is internal. Right? I chose not to do this. I don't do this. It doesn't fit with who I am, my morals, my ways of thinking about things. It's not that I can't, it's that I don't. And so that makes us feel like we're more in control when we say I don't do something. And because we're more in control, we're more successful in the end of sticking to our goals.
Yeah, I see that there's a power in that. And I want to stick to this kind of self-talk. Well, again, like we're going to talk about the way you should talk to yourself and then the way you can communicate with others. And sometimes they're the same. But one of the things I found so interesting in your book was this idea of sometimes referring to yourself or talking to yourself in the, like, what is it, in the second person or the third person, instead
like
of
an outsider would, yes.
Yeah, like an outsider would refer to you, rather than calling yourself I, rather than referring to yourself in your self-talk as I. So, I have this guy that I played tennis with, and he gets he's probably listening to this podcast because I know he listens to my podcast, but he gets really frustrated when he messes up. He throws his tennis racket, but he's always, come on, last name, come on, Peterson. I'm changing his name to protect his identity, but he'll be like, come on, Peterson. And he, throws his racket at the thing, and he's always like, and again, I don't know if this is like the most healthy way, but it's like he always objectifies himself. He never says, oh, I suck or I messed up. He's always talking to himself in that way. And I thought that was very interesting that he refers to himself in that way. And sometimes when you're trying to encourage yourself, like, you got this rather than I got this, right? Yeah. Why is that? Tell me about why that's more powerful.
Yeah. So there's a great researcher out of the University of Michigan who studies self-talk. He has a nice book called Chatter. His name is Ethan Kross. And one thing he talks about is using language, the language of self-talk, for ourselves in difficult situations. So, we're nervous about giving a big speech. We're anxious about a big presentation. We have a job interview. We have a meeting that's important. We're feeling really anxious. We're, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm going to do a good job, all those different things. What's interesting in those situations, though, is that if someone else told us that they were nervous about a big presentation, or someone else told us they were nervous about a job interview, what would we say? Say something like, you can do it, right? You've got this, right? You're in control. You can do it. Jonah, you've got this, or Peterson, you've got this, to go back to your friend's name, right? When we give advice, we step out of ourselves and we step into our advice giver role. And we help people realize that, look, this is just a moment that's passing, but you've got this, right? You can rise above this. You've done this before. When we're in it ourselves, though, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that for ourselves. And so the research wondered, look, if we could get people to talk to themselves like an outsider would that help them be more successful? Would that help them in some sense reduce their anxiety about the situation, give them some distance? Right? Because that's why being an outsider is so helpful. When it's ourselves, we're like, oh my God, the boss is going to be there and I don't know. And, I'm really worried about this. When it's not ourselves, we go, look, I mean, you've done this all your career. Like, yeah, this is another one, but you seem to have done it before. So you can probably do it now. We move beyond the specific to the more general, and we're very helpful. And so what they did is they put people in situations that were difficult, anxiety producing. You're giving a big speech. It matters a whole bunch, and people are very nervous. For some people, they said, talk to yourself like you usually would, using I. For other people, they said, talk to yourself like an outsider would, like, a third person perspective, like somebody else who wasn't in this situation would. So, you can do this using your name, those type of things. And they found that not only did using, that outsider perspective, you can do this using your name, not only did it make people anxious, but it led them to perform better as a result, led them to give better speeches. People thought they did a better job, were more competent, because it essentially allows us to get away from these negative emotions that are very top of mind if it's us, but less top of mind if we're distant, right? In some sense, distance dulls emotions. It's not us giving the speech anymore. We're treating it like it's a second person. It's a you. And we're treating it like a you. It's less emotional for us and helps us be more successful as a result.
I want to step away from talking to ourselves and more how we might talk to others, especially, and how we might write for others to get them kind of to do what we want them to do. And I don't necessarily mean that in a sort of manipulative way, but just be more effective at communicating, and, a lot of my job during the day is writing headlines, writing stories that help people, be better small business leaders, et cetera. But I also, let's face it, we're a business, and I'm trying to convince people to read the articles that I'm writing. And then I know the word clickbait gets used as very derogatory way, and I don't, I was thinking about this morning. I don't think it's not that clickbait, getting somebody to click on a headline is so evil. It's just that when it's evil and sort of destructive when you get somebody to click on a headline that doesn't deliver what you promised. Right. So that's the sort of difference. So I'm not going to beat myself up over writing clickbait. I mean, you sort of have to write headlines that people want to click on. And right. I'm sorry. I see you.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
You agree? I mean, I think so.
I think what I would say is a couple things. First, you're exactly right. There's no problem in getting people's attention for valuable things, right? If you're going to say, hey, I'm going to use a headline to get people to eat healthier and save the environment, and be nice to puppies, everyone would say, great, go ahead, get their attention, get them to read, not only get their attention, which a headline does, but hold their attention, which is what the content does. The problem with clickbait often gets our attention, but it doesn't hold our attention. It doesn't deliver. Also, when it's used for things that we don't feel like are
positive for the world,
right? If it gets us to eat junk food and be bad to the environment and kick puppies, well, then we wouldn't want to do it. And so it's not that the technique itself is bad; it's what's it used to get people to do, and does it deliver? Right? If we can use headlines to get people to pay attention and content to get to hold people's attention, to think how to help the environment, everybody would be happy with that. It's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. And yet, unfortunately, the reality is that, and this is a whole different conversation and the psychology of people, but the outrage click, we call it, there is a person out there and many people out there that will click on the headline that expresses some sort of outrage or anger about, frustration about something, right? And those that is a way to get people to respond.
Yeah. So I'll say a few things. So first I'll talk a little bit about getting attention, and then I'll talk a little about holding attention. I think they're two separate things. And I'll distinguish them. Getting attention is getting people to click on a headline, open an email, look at a social media post. Holding attention is getting them to read that email, to read beyond the headline of the article to the first, to the second, to the third paragraph, right? To watch the video or the content embedded in social media. And so we want to do both, right? We want to get people's attention, and we also want to hold it. And so in terms of getting attention, there are a variety of different things, but I'll mention a couple. One is the word you. Right. So I did a big analysis of a large technology company's social media posts, hundreds of posts. How much engagement did they get? What language did they use? The word you increased engagement. You, you'll, your, whatever it might be, got more likes, more shares on social media content. Why? Because you acts like a stop sign. Right? You makes us feel like content is tailored towards us and makes us more likely to pay attention. Now, you's been a little bit overused. Right. If it's used in a context that feels like someone trying to overly persuade us, we may push back. Right. How do you know that I'm going to like this?
Yeah. You don't agree with that. But
it can be a good way to get people at least to stop and pay attention. Right. 5 tips for saving money, 5 tips that can save you money. Oh, now I'm a little more likely to open it. Am I definitely going to look at it? No. Right. But am I going to be more likely to open it? Yes. I'm more likely to, whether it's online content, to stop and look at it for a second. An email, I'm more likely to open it because it feels like it's tailored towards me. It's not just for everybody. It's for me in particular. Questions can also do that nicely, right? They can do a good job of getting people to stop and pay attention. Same with things that open up a curiosity gap. Right. So really good headlines often encourage you to open up the article because you want to figure out the answer.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know yet what happened. If the headline gives away the answer, then I don't need to continue to pay attention. And so that helps us move just from getting attention to holding attention. We did a a big analysis of tens of thousands of pieces of online content. So from a variety of different publishers, almost 1 million users reading this content. We know how far down the article they read, and we look at how the language that's used throughout the article shapes how long they read, right? What leads to longer reads. And what we found is, yes, emotion helps. You mentioned anger, for example. Yes, emotion can help, but not all emotions help. In particular, emotions or language that evoke uncertainty is quite helpful, right? So anxiety, for example, is an emotion that evokes uncertainty. Hope, though, is also an emotion that evokes uncertainty. Why does uncertainty hold our attention? Because we don't know how it ends, right? If I'm feeling hopeful, I want to figure out, did the hopeful thing happen? If I'm feeling anxious, I want to try to figure out if that anxiety producing thing is going to happen. I want to resolve the uncertainty. And so whether it's opening a curiosity gap, asking a question, which encourages uncertainty, or using uncertain emotions like an anxiety or hope, all of those can hold people's attention. But it's not the only thing that holds people attention. So high arousal emotions that fire us up, that motivate us to take action, also encourage holding attention, because we're sort of fired up and want to figure out how it resolves. And even things that just make content easier to process. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes content's easy to read and sometimes it's harder to read. It can be easier to read because it's written at a grade level that's more appropriate. It can be easy to read because the way the clauses are structured are easy. It can be easy to read because it uses familiar words. It can be easy to read because it uses concrete words, right? Words that are easy to imagine. All of those things mean it requires less work to move through the content. And if it requires less work, I'm less likely to opt out and go do something else, right? Not even because the content's gripping, but it's just not difficult. It's less friction filled, right? If it's easier to move through, I'm going to be more likely to continue to stay with it and get a chance to see what it says later. And so there are a variety of different approaches, both to hold attention and to get attention.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned the concrete language, and you talk about concrete language in your book. And I'd love to talk about what you mean by concrete language.
Sure.
And then the sort of opposite of concrete language, which is language that hedges, and you make this distinction. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would say the good way to think about it is there's concrete versus abstract language.
Okay.
And what do I mean by that? So a very concrete thing is a table, a microphone, a glass, a computer, a desk, a car. All of those are things I can see, I can touch, I can feel them. The word logistics, strategy, values, love, all of those are much more abstract concepts. They're harder to understand, but even the same thing can be described more concretely or more abstractly. So let's say I'm a customer service agent, for example. I can say something very concrete, like your money will be there tomorrow. Or I can say something more abstract, your refund will be there shortly. Right? I know what money looks like. I can touch money. I can see money. I can feel money. I'm imagining a green dollar bill. I don't know what a refund looks like, right? I can't touch a refund. I might be able to touch the check they send me, but I don't have as much of a physical sense of what it is. Same with soon versus tomorrow, right? I know when tomorrow is. I don't know when soon is. And so across a variety of contexts, concrete language can be beneficial. It's easier to understand. I know what someone's saying. It's easier to remember because I get a picture of it in my mind. We talked about how it encourages a holding of attention just because it requires less work. But it can even improve things like listening. The more we use concrete language when responding to people, the more they feel like we're listening to them. We looked at thousands of customer service calls from a big airline and a clothing retailer. And we found that when agents use more concrete language, customers are more satisfied and they buy more stuff in the future because they feel like that agent heard them. Right? It's really easy in a customer service interaction or a interpersonal interaction just to use some stock phrases. I can help you with that. I'm sorry you had a tough day. That sounds really difficult, right? But when my spouse says something like, "Oh, that sounds tough," it doesn't really feel like she's listening. It feels like she cares, right? She knows she should say something, but it doesn't feel like she's deeply listening to me. Whereas she says, "Oh my God, that must have been so difficult. What happened next?" Or, "Oh man, I'm so sorry that happened. How are you feeling about that?" Using more concrete words that follow up on exactly what I said, well, that shows listening.
Yeah.
Right? Because often we did listen. Right? I'm in my spouse also. I'm listening to what she's saying, but I don't only want to listen. I want to show her that I'm listening. Concrete language does that, right? Questions can do it as well, but good concrete language shows listening because it shows you paid attention, you understood, and you actually heard what was said, which improves social interactions as a result.
The show don't tell, show don't sell. Yeah.
Yes.
And it reminds me, I was on a plane recently and we were like sitting on the tarmac, and the pilot gets on, he's like, we'll be moving in a few moments. And I'm like, what are moments?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The airlines are like the most the most worst perpetrators of like this vague non-concrete language, that it makes you crazy because it's so vague.
Yeah, whenever I hear that, I'm like, it's going to be a while. Like, you just don't want to tell me it's going to be a while, but it doesn't feel good, right? I'm sure they're doing that because someone in corporate said, hey, just like on customer service, we call customer service, say, we value your call. We'll answer it shortly.
Do you really?
If you really valued my call, we'd be talking right now rather than hearing this music, right? And so it indicates that the company knows they should care. The airline knows they should care, but they may not want to give you a concrete number because they might be wrong. Right. But then the problem is if people don't know when it is, they're not feeling like the company's being very straightforward with them.
All right. Last topic I want to talk to you about. Let you go. So we talked about hedging, and I kind of confused concrete language with speaking with confidence, although maybe they're sort of tied a bit here. But you talk about, and you use the example of Donald Trump. And I do think about Donald Trump a lot because he is a good communicator, no matter what you think about him. I can't stand him. I'll just say it publicly. But anyway, he is a good communicator and he gets people he influences a lot of people. So it's interesting to look at his techniques. And you talk about him as an example of somebody who speaks in a confident way, as opposed to somebody who hedges. I think I err more on the side of the hedging. I'd like to find a middle ground to not be like a pompous ass, but also to not seem like a wishy-washy, indecisive guy. So talk to me about the difference between speaking, writing with confidence and hedging.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Trump does something that many people that others think have charisma does, right? Whether you like Trump or not, he's an amazing job selling his ideas.
Yeah.
Even if you hate his ideas, he's got a large portion of the country to go, these ideas are great. And so even if you don't like them, he's doing something that's worth.
Yeah. What does he do? Yeah.
But what he's doing is he's not unique in that regard. He's doing the same thing that many sort of quote unquote great leaders, great entrepreneurs do, top selling salespeople do, gurus do. They speak with a great deal of certainty or confidence. And what do I mean by that? This will definitely happen. Everyone agrees. This happens all the time. This is absolutely right. This will certainly occur, right? They're not saying, yeah, well, maybe. They're saying,
I think this might happen. Yeah.
Everybody agree. We shouldn't even think about it. So everybody would agree, right? We don't have victories anymore. He's not saying we don't win as much as we used to. We don't have victories anymore, right? I'll build a great wall. It's not just I'll build I'll build a great wall. I beat China all the time. It's exactly what that means, but it seems like he's really confident. And indeed, when people seem confident, other people tend to be more. Right. Research
you said, and you broke up a little there. When people seem confident, other people do what?
Oh, sorry. Other people are more likely to listen. There's some research in the context of financial advisors. People prefer confident advisors, even when those advisors may be overconfident, because when someone's so confident, it's hard to believe that they're wrong. Contrast that with what most of us do, which is hedge. I think this might be this. It seems like this, right? We do that as a crutch, but we are undermining in many cases our influence. And so what does that mean? Well, I'm not saying don't hedge ever. There's time to hedge, right? Hedge can signal that we're open to other opinions. So hedging can be good, but if we're trying to persuade others, if we want to seem confident, we got to ditch the hedges, right? Avoid those hedges, or at least call out the uncertainty. Rather than saying, I don't know if this will work, say, I think this is a great strategy. Sounds confident, but for this strategy to work, we need to do these three things. Right? I'm calling out. I'm making it seem like this is easy, but I'm also not making it seem like I'm uncertain. I know exactly what we need to do for this to work. And so I'm calling out that uncertainty. Can be a good way to signal certainty while also signaling that we still need to do work together.
This is a tricky one for me. And maybe it's because I was raised to be sort of modest and humble and whatever. And yet, well, it's a whole different story. I've been around very charismatic people in my life who are just like, they're the opposite, right? But they kind of bother me because I hate, people who are such blowhards like that. They drive me crazy. So I don't want to be that person. And yet I find myself all day writing emails to like clients and stuff saying, I think, maybe we want to consider doing this. And it's like, I as I'm writing it, I feel like such a, like,
You're backing away from
like,
it. You like
I'm
drop it
backing
off.
away, and yet I'm trying to be deferential, but I never
Yep.
know that sort of, should I present a more confident thing, even to somebody who's higher than me in the sort of hierarchical order, a client, for example. What is your take on that? Like, there's that fine balance between sort of like imposing
Confidence and overconfidence.
yeah, right.
I think that's, and I loved your point about who we're talking to, right?
Yeah.
If I'm a junior member of a team, if I'm just working with a client for the first time, there are times where we don't want to signal too much confidence. I think though, before we talk, we need to know which situation we're in. And we have to understand what signals confidence, right? If we're hedging because we've thought about it and we've decided, look, I want to signal I'm not confident about this, then that's great, because at least we've made a decision knowing what the language is doing. I think too often we hedge because it's convenient, because we're used to doing it. Let's make sure we're strategically hedging. I'm not saying don't ever hedge, but I'm saying make sure we're using it strategically.
Jonah, I could talk to you for 3 hours. I see why people go to the Wharton School. They get to see you lecture, but you're so fascinating. And if people want to find out more information about you, where should they go?
So first of all, thank you for having me. Great conversation. I very much enjoyed it. You can find a bunch of free resources about the book. So a one-pager with the Speak framework, a bunch of downloadable videos and content about the book. All of that is at my website, which is just jonahberger.com. The book is available wherever books are sold. And you can also find me at J1Berger on either Twitter or LinkedIn.
And the book we talked about today, and he's got a bunch. This one is called Magic Words, What to Say to Get Your Way. Love it. Jonah, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.